If you're new to taxidermy and trying to learn more, I'll show you how I mounted this pheasant step by step and everything you need to know. I'm still a beginner myself and not a professional taxidermist by any means, so I'll be showing you exactly what I'm learning, mistakes included. So if you're just a beginner, this is for you. I'm going to be using this kit from Matuska Taxidermy. It includes the body mannequin, a head with eyes, and the beak just needs to be painted. Neck material, I have some left over, but it'll come in two pieces like that, and then you just have to hot glue them together. It comes with all the wire that you'll need. A few extra things that you might want is some batting material. This is just like raw cotton. Borax is a must whenever you're doing taxidermy. A good pair of shears or some kind of heavy-duty scissors. A very, very sharp knife, especially the point there. Paper towels, gloves. Also included in the kit is this book. It shows you step by step on how to mount any bird, basically. Here's our specimen that we're working with today. I set him out this morning so that he could thaw. He's been in my deep freezer for a while. He's in pretty decent shape. The most important thing when you're starting taxidermy is that you pick a good specimen. Not every animal is going to be suited for doing taxidermy. You know, one that's all shot up, missing foot, wing, something. You know, make sure that you get a good specimen that's in relatively good shape. We're going to start off with some light stretches. Get those wings kind of opened up, the legs loosened up. For our first cut, you want to separate out the feathers on the breast here. There'll be a natural part in the feathers. So I just kind of work my fingers along there about where it is. You'll feel the keel bone there. And you'll just kind of work your way down to that until you find that part. You can also just use a spray bottle with some water to wet those feathers down. And that'll help keep them out of the way and make it easier to work with everything. There we're starting to find that natural part in the feathers. This is still skin. That's just literally where the feathers part and just makes a natural line to cut right there. So that's what you're looking for. You just want to get as many feathers pulled out of the way as you can. Start with a shallow cut down the chest like that. And you're really letting your fingers do most of the work here. The skin on pheasants is pretty tough. Pheasants are a really good option for your first bird. You want to continue that incision until you're down to the vent here. You want to get past the majority of the breast meat here. And as you could tell, I hardly use the knife. Once I make that first incision, it's mainly my fingers just separating the skin from the meat. This bird's a little bit more frozen than I'd like it to be. I'd like to be able to move the legs around better. It makes it easier to like bend that leg and pop it out of the skin here, but we can still make do with it. I'm working my hand and my finger down around the leg right now, just trying to get the skin loosened up around the leg here. I'm going to go ahead and start cutting this leg out now. I've got it opened up here, and I'm just going to take my knife and cut lightly right where the leg meets the body there. And you'll feel the bone. Right there's the bone. And I can see the hip joint right there. And you just kind of want to, there's a little bit of cartilage and connective tissue around that. You just want to cut around that until you can bend that leg down and pop that little hip joint out right there. I was able to separate this leg totally away from the body, and now I'm going to work this up. Keep pulling that skin away from the meat and just slowly work your way down to the knee joint right here. It'll get a little tougher right there, and then you can just come back in here with your knife and get a little bit of tension. It's going to be hard to do with just two hands, and you can kind of use your fingernail to scrape that down a little bit. And then if you need to come back with your knife and just cut up some little pieces there. Just be really gentle, make small cuts. Once you get it down a pretty good ways, you want to take your knife, cut right up against the skin there, and on the back, cut those tendons off, and then turn your knife and cut up along the bone then. And you just want to follow along the bone. Work your way through those tendons there. You can also use your scissors or your shears. Get a blade turned under there and cut those. Those tendons are super tough, so whatever you need to do to get cut through them, you can do that. And then to cut it off, you'll just bend that down, take your knife, cut along the sides there, loosen up that cartilage, and just cut through it like that. Now that our legs are out of the way, I'm going to take my fingers and continue working that skin down and off of the back here. And the back is very thin and fragile on a pheasant, so you'll have to be really careful. You can alternate between just using your fingers, using the knife when you feel like it's getting too tough for your fingers to pull. And you just want to work your finger until you can get them like a circle around the tail here. Right there, I can get my finger through. Now I'm going to take my shears here, slide those up by the base of the tail, and just cut that off. You can see I left plenty of meat there, so I didn't cut into the tail feather quills or anything. Now I can fold that tail up, get that out of the way, and start working up the back here. Again, taking your time. I'm just kind of using my thumb and the rest of the body as a leverage here, and just putting some tension on the skin right here, and then just lightly taking my knife across any membrane or tissue that's getting caught, and just slowly working that skin up the back, trying to keep the feathers all out of the way here. I'm not super worried about this meat on here right now. I'm more worried about not putting a hole in the skin, because we're going to flesh out this bird anyway. But obviously, if you can skin it without leaving too much meat on the skin, that's ideal. But that meat will peel off super easy as well. Once you get away from kind of that rump patch of feathers, it gets a little bit thicker then towards the shoulders. So I can kind of go back to my finger here, just working my way back and forth along the back until we get up to the wings. So I flipped this pheasant over and I'm just kind of working out these wings from each angle. The wing sacs are pretty delicate and you have to take your time to get those very gently peeled away from the skin. While I let the wings thaw out, I'm going to move on up to the head. There's some pretty intricate little flaps of skin here around the nostril, around here on the bottom jaw. But just take your time. You can kind of pull those feathers away and you'll see where that skin lines up and meets up with the beak. You really want to cut almost part of the beak off. You want to leave as much of the feather as you can, because you can always come back with scissors and then cut off any extra. Right here, I'm just slowly working my way around the feathers where they meet the beak. Just working my knife under the feathers, kind of prying them up, getting that skin opened up to where I can slice that off of the beak. This pheasant had sat in my freezer for maybe 2 years, so the face had gotten a little bit freezer burnt, and it was really giving me some problems here. Just, I had to keep fighting that skin. It was pretty dry. You could add some water to it and wet it down, and that will usually help kind of soften up that skin and make it a little bit easier to remove from the beak. Right here, you'll see me using tweezers to try to pull that skin back. I was just trying to get some separation between the skin and the skull. This is a good time to tell you to keep working that skin all the way back off of the skull. Work that skin all the way back until you can get to the base of the skull and then remove the head from the neck. This will save you a big headache in the future, as you'll see here in a little bit. So I've got one of the shoulders cut off, and now I'm just gonna start kind of rolling the pheasant here and working my way around the back and just getting as much skin loosened up as I can to get my way to the other shoulder. Right there, I've got the shoulder bone exposed. So now I can come in with my cutters. Try to get as close to the base as you can. And They're hollow bones, so they cut pretty easily. Gently worked my way down here. And now we're just down to the neck. Working that skin down. And kind of squeezing the head to get that skin to invert. Just going to cut off right here at the base. And I want to do a quick comparison between the mannequin and the actual body here. As you can see, they line up pretty well. Take note of where those shoulders are in comparison to the mannequin. I just made a huge mistake, and I was trying to get that head turned and ended up blowing out the neck. So, looks like you guys are going to get to see a pretty extensive repair job now. Something to look forward to there. So now that I got the skin pulled up here, I've came to the ear, and you'll see that skin is just kind of attached. You just want to angle your knife blade into the skull, and that'll just cut right out there. We're starting to come up onto the eyelids here. So you want to just keep your knife blade really close to that skull so that you get as much of that inner eyelid as you can. Keeping pressure on the skin and working your way back and forth. I'm just working the skin slowly down the face here, taking very small cuts, just cutting that skin away slowly so I don't put any holes into it. Keep cutting down until you get down to the beak, and then you can completely slice that skin off nice and easy. Alright, now we're going to take a quick comparison to the neck right here compared to what I've got for foam. You need to have enough neck to come up and wrap around the head so that that all meets up nice. Alright, it looks like we'll have plenty of neck material. And then to just compare the fake head to the real head then real quick. Pretty good match up there. Our little neck hole here, it's gonna be a couple inches, but I think we'll be able to work around it, kind of get that fleshed and then stitched back up, and it shouldn't be too bad. For the leg, they've got these kneecaps on there basically. I just cut that off, and then there's this little tab on the side. I like to cut that off too so that I've got a nice smooth area to work with. Now for the next thing that we need to do, I'm going to take a paper towel and wrap it around this leg. Take one of the wires from the kit and push it into the leg. And that's going to get all the marrow that's in that leg out. You can also take some pipe cleaners and clean that out as well. Repeat on the other side here. Now we've just got a few more areas to clean up here. We need to get these wings turned. So there's two different ways that you can do this. The first way is to just completely pull that wing out, completely invert it, and then you can get down in there with your knife and cut that meat out in between those two bones. If you think of like a chicken wing that you would eat, that's the area that you're working with right here. There's those two bones kind of in an oval shape, and you're just trying to get all of that meat out from in between there. Here's the other way that you can remove the meat out of that wing. You can just make a small incision on the underside of the wing in between those two oval bones there. You'll open up the skin just like that, and then you can get into that area a lot easier, have a lot better access, and be able to just cut all of that meat out and then use some borax and kind of scrape it clean with your fingers. This is better if you're doing a standing bird, because then you can tuck that wing into the body. Here, I'm just taking the meat off of those tail feather quills, just cutting off as much meat as I can with the knife there. There's a small bone in between the quills that you'll have to remove, and a little wax pocket that they use to oil themselves with. I'm just trying to get as much off of the quills here before I go over to the wire wheel. Now that we've got the body removed from this pheasant, we can start fleshing the bird. There's two different ways that you can do that. You can either use a wire wheel to kind of scrape the fat out of the quills here and get this extra meat off, or you can use scissors turned on their sides and just come along and kind of trim along the skin there and cut out that fat and meat that's left over. The first thing that we need to do before we start fleshing it, though, is to give it a quick rinse so that the feathers will be out of the way and don't get hung up in my wire wheel. This will just be a quick rinse with cold water to remove any blood or dirt that might be stuck in the feathers. I'm trying to make sure that I keep the feathers pointed in their natural direction and don't get too crazy in bending them with the water or how it's laying in the sink here. Now I just need to let some of this excess water drip off before I take it over to the wire wheel. Here's my wire wheel. Yes, I made this myself. It's just got a drill back here with an arbor, with an extension, and then the wire wheel, plastic to keep the fat kind of contained. If there's a lot of interest, I can do a video on just making a wire wheel like this. Let me know down in the comments if you guys are interested. Before I get too carried away with the wire wheel here, I'll just kind of give you a quick rundown on what the goal is here. So what we want to do is get this fat here there'll be kind of pockets of feather quills. You can see like right here, it's just skin. There's no feathers there actually. But then right along the spine, there's all these quills here. So what we need to do is take the wire wheel and just go super lightly across there. And you're basically just trying to break that membrane open, get as much fat out of the quills as you can so that the borax can penetrate in there and dry everything up. Make sure that you hit these bones, get any extra meat that's left on those cleaned up. We're just trying to get this pheasant as cleaned up as we can before we move on to mounting. Going with the quills, lightly bring the skin up to the wire wheel to start scraping out the fat that's in between the quills. Be super gentle when you're fleshing out the head. You can see I've got my fingers actually inside the feathers so that I can keep a constant pressure on the skin. I got this pheasant all fleshed finally, and now I'm giving it a warm bath with some soap, usually Dawn, but any soap that has a good grease removing agent to it will work. This is about a 95 to 100 degree bath. I'm gonna let it soak in here for about 30 minutes and then we'll rinse it off and move on to the next step. I like to give it a little bit of agitation just to make sure that the soap gets into all the feathers. That neck, make sure you move the neck around and get some water worked into there. Just make sure that you get soap on all the feathers so that it can start degreasing everything. While I wait for that skin in the wash, I'm going to start on my other prep work. I start out by drilling a hole in the back of this pheasant head. I just use my drill with a smaller drill bit. I put a hole just above maybe the halfway mark there in the back of the head and drill about a 1/4 inch. And I like to just take the drill bit and kind of move it around in a circle to waller out the hole so that I can bend a wire and then hot glue it in there. Now is also a good time to paint the beak. You can either do it now before you mount the bird up, or you can always do it later too. I like to get basically an ivory color, but you know, always look at reference photos and see what looks good to you. Mix what color works. I just start off with some white and then just a drop of yellow. We'll get that mixed up. Obviously, that's way too much. You don't need that much. You can also use an airbrush, but chances are if you're just starting out, you probably won't have an airbrush. So I'm just showing you the simple way for beginners to do it here. So get your paint color about where you want it, just kind of a off-white, a light ivory color, whatever you want to call it. Again, reference photos. And paint more, like paint past where that beak is so that you get a nice coverage of all of the beak. And you can always come in and scratch off later so that you can glue your skin on to the areas around the beak. Get up under there along where the two halves meet there. Make sure to get in the nostrils really good. A nice soft bristled brush will help remove any brush strokes, so just go nice and light. And a nice thin coat of paint also helps to get a nice smooth finish. There's the first wash done. Now I'm going to finish doing any final touch-ups on fleshing. Just get any last little bits of meat and fat that are left, and then it'll get another wash and a rinse, and then we'll be ready to start patching up some holes. I got this pheasant all washed up, so now it's time to start working on these holes and getting them all fixed up. I'm going about every 1/4 inch here with my stitching. I'm just tying off my thread and then working along that cut to stitch it back together, just making a simple kind of loop pattern. Well, I got the majority of the body all stitched up, so let's do the neck now. That'll be fun. So this being the neck, it's going to be pretty thin and a sensitive area, I guess you could say. So how you want to approach this is just take really small stitches. So like before I was doing maybe like a 1/4 inch stitch, and this I want to be an 1/8 inch or less. So, you know, start out like usual, just find an end, tie off, threads tied off, and just kind of line up those two sides. Stick through there and repeat that down the length of the cut. Now I need to start drying the bird. You can either use a pet dryer or, like I have, a vacuum cleaner, reverse to blow and dry out the feathers. My feathers are about 80% dry right now, but my skin's starting to dry out. So if that happens on you, just take a little water bottle, a little mister, just spritz some water on the skin and kind of work it into the dry spots. These wing pockets are really thin and dry out fast, so you'll probably have to hit those. But just a little spritz of water and everything will moisten back up and be good to go. Before I get too much further drying this bird out, I want to wire up the legs and the wings so that, you know, the skin's not getting basically saran wrapped around the bones. So let's go ahead and get that done. So you'll find the wires that are marked legs and wings. So you'll just come along the back of the kneecap there, run your wire down along the back of the leg. You'll feel it coming down. Make sure not to poke out the leg. And for a standing mount, you can open the foot pad and pull that wire out, and then, you know, leave an inch or two of wire sticking out. For a flying mount, you'll just leave it just like this, with that wire comes down about right to the foot. The easiest way that I found to attach the wire to the bone is just to use a zip tie, and the little flange part of the bone will keep the zip tie on. So, you know, other than having that big knot there, but when you stuff the meat part back into the leg, it will cover up that zip tie, so it's not that big of a deal. But that's kind of the only concern, but it's a heck of a lot easier than wrapping that whole leg up with string. Now for the wing, you'll have to drill into the bigger bone of the two, and you just want to take a drill bit, find kind of the elbow, and there'll be the joint there, and just slowly drill into that. There'll be a little bit of marrow that comes out. You can clean that up. You can see that hole there. And then just take your piece of wire, there it goes. You'll have to kind of push through the inner bracing and everything, and then there it's bottomed out. And then you'll just wrap it up that elbow and zip tie it off. Now that we've got everything wired up, we can sprinkle some borax into the wings and legs. I kind of like to just give myself a good pile in the middle and then work it around from there. So right here, I'm running the wing wire down through the body, and once I get it out, I like to just bend that wire over and around and then push it back into the body to securely lock it into the body. Same thing with the legs down here. You can see that this was supposed to be a standing mount, so the thigh meat is kind of recreated there. So I'm just putting that leg wire in right at the base of that and then pushing it all the way through the body and then bending that wire and bending it back into the body to lock it into place. And here I'm just kind of test fitting the skin, getting everything to kind of line up on the body, making sure that I can get all of my main points attached in the right spot. Um, I'm pinning the tail up here so that I know kind of my known spots. I know where the tail needs to be, so I can pin that in and know that everything else needs to line up from that point. I'm using some T-pins in there to kind of pin down the breast feathers to where they need to go. That helps hold everything tight as you stitch it, keeps everything in place, and just kind of gives you a head start to really closing in that zipper of the skin. Here I'm starting to stitch the bird back up using those 1/4 inch stitches and just going along, trying to keep my feathers out of my stitching so that it's just skin and thread, and that'll help make your seam look really nice and tight. As you're going along, don't forget to put some stuffing in the legs and wings. I usually always forget, and like on this bird, as soon as I put that last stitch in, I realized that I didn't put any stuffing into the legs or wings, and at that point it was too late. So always be sure to put that stuffing right there in front of you and put it in before you get everything all stitched up. Now I filled up that hole in the back of the skull that I showed you earlier with hot glue and just pushed it into that little loop in the wire to attach the head to the neck. Here I'm starting to glue the skin to the actual skull part here. I'm just taking some good super glue. I'm using the Gorilla Super Glue Gel. That dries really fast and makes it easy to lock that skin in quickly instead of having to sit there and wait for super glue to dry and hold the skin into place. I'm using tweezers to pull the skin up where it needs to go, putting that super glue on and then just letting that super glue do its thing, locking that skin into place, pulling the skin right around the eyes, getting that skin all glued up, and I just keep working my way around the skull until everything's all glued up. So as you saw, I got the face all glued up. I finished drying the bird 100%. Make sure that you really get all of the feathers dried. get them lined up and set, preened. I got the wings and tail feather all taped up. That's just spreading out the feathers and getting them taped as best as you can. There's a couple different methods to doing that. You can use tape like that, or you can also use like a foam weather stripping and pin it together, two pieces sandwiching the feathers in the right position. I got the feet taped also so that they'll dry in the right position. It was supposed to be a standing mount, but I just don't like standing pheasants. I think they're too beautiful of a bird to have these wings closed up and everything. So I made it into a flying mount. I think that pheasant turned out pretty good for me. Like I said, I'm a beginner and still learning, but I learn something new every time I mount another animal. If you're into the outdoors, working with your hands, learning skills that people don't want to learn anymore, stick around, hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more projects coming up in the future. Thank you for watching Stone Post Outdoors.